With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. Poland is investigating a suspected act of sabotage aimed at blowing up a train on the strategic Warsaw-Lublin rail line used by NATO to resupply Ukraine. An explosion destroyed part of the track over the weekend, prompting prosecutors and the National Security Council to launch emergency reviews. Prime Minister Donald Tusk said the blast confirmed the nation's worst fears, calling it an unprecedented attack on Poland's security. Additional devices were found, including a metal clamp and damaged overhead lines, and 2 trains sustained damage without injuries. Officials say Russian involvement cannot be ruled out, citing similar sabotage attempts across Europe and prior Polish convictions of Russian-linked operatives targeting military transport routes. France has agreed for the first time to supply Ukraine with around 100 Rafale fighter jets and associated weapons under a new deal announced by Presidents Emmanuel Macron and Volodymyr Zelensky in Paris. The long-term package also includes French air defense systems, drones, and bombs. Zelensky, touring Europe for support, recently secured U.S. LNG deliveries via Greece and will visit Spain next. Macron called Ukraine Europe's first line of defense and urged a fair and sustainable peace, while criticizing Moscow's refusal to negotiate. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Russia remains interested in a future Trump-Putin meeting. Islamic State West Africa Province, or ISWAP, claimed it captured and executed Nigerian Brigadier General M. Uba during an ambush in Borno State, contradicting the Nigerian Army's denial. The military said Uba's convoy came under heavy fire near Wajiroko, killing 2 soldiers and 2 civilian Joint Task Force members, but insisted the general was not taken. ISWAP, via Al-Amaq, called this an outright lie. The group, a Boko Haram offshoot, continues deadly attacks across the northeast, including raids that killed soldiers in Malam Fatori, Nagamdu, Wajiroko, and Wulgo. Separately, gunmen abducted about 25 female students in Kebbi State. A major corruption scandal involving Tamir Mindich, a longtime associate of Volodymyr Zelensky, has severely damaged the Ukrainian president's re-election prospects, opposition MP Yaroslav Zelezhnyak said. Mindich was charged by NABU over an alleged $100 million energy kickback scheme, prompting 2 ministerial resignations. Zelezhnyak claims private polling shows Zelensky's support dropping below 20%, with a 40% plunge in 1 week, effectively eliminating his viability for a second term. Zelensky has not renewed his mandate, citing martial law. Ukrainian media suggests Mindich, now considered an oligarch, may be serving as a political fall guy rather than the scheme's mastermind. Nigel Farage responded to the Labour government's new plans to curb illegal migration by insisting Britain must also slash legal immigration, which he says is damaging productivity, overburdening welfare, and driving up taxes. Ahead of a budget expected to include major tax hikes, Farage argued the spending on foreign nationals should be cut before asking Britons to sacrifice more. Reform UK policy chief Zaya Yousaf said the state should stop withholding cost data and end billions in welfare payments to foreign nationals, require migrants to cover NHS costs, and sharply reduce foreign aid. Yousaf called it treachery to tax Britons while funding outsiders. Farage added that Labour will be unable to enact real border reforms due to its own MPs and international legal constraints.
It is legal migration that is doing enormous damage to the British economy, and it's been so difficult to even talk about this subject without being screamed down. But just look at the direct link between falls in productivity and the mass importation of unskilled labour. In fact, that trend has been there now for the best part of 20 years.
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
And welcome to The World Today and the Protagonists. Today we're looking at topic is the destruction of democracy in the EU. Now, the EU has recently announced a democracy shield. That's to monitor information manipulation. It also includes a media resilience program to support independent journalism. What is this but a ministry of truth and an assault on free speech and national sovereignty? The media landscape in Europe is already corrupted by a large censorship machine. Some would just call it Ursula. An EU funded CERV, or a Creative Europe, and other sources funnel billions of euros into organisations that are supposedly independent but are not. Now, even more funds will go into supercharging Brussels propaganda. With seemingly an endless flow of money, the EU sits like a giant parasite, some would call it a slug, on top of its member states, committing to an endless war in Ukraine, threatening to plunder Russian sovereign assets, developing interoperable digital infrastructure, digitised currency, and a surveillance state. Now, Thomas Farsi, who couldn't join us today, writes that the democracy shield is a dangerous escalation into an EU-wide censorship machine. Tools like this and the Digital Services Act claim to protect citizens and democracy, but coupled with von der Leyen's plans for an EU intelligence apparatus, points to a broader and deeply disturbing power centralisation in the hands of the Commission and von der Leyen personally. Farsi says the war on democracy isn't being waged by Moscow or Beijing, it's been waged by Brussels. How did we get here? Why can't this dangerous descent into tyranny be stopped by the member states? Our guest today will give us their views on the EU and where to from here. Our first guest is Paul D. Thacker, an investigative journalist and founder of the Disinformation Chronicle. Our next guest is Professor Emeritus Oliver Boyd Barrett, Bowling Green University, Ohio, and California State University. And third is Dr. Greg Simons, geopolitical commentator and an expert in media and communications. First of all, gentlemen, and I don't use that word loosely, but thank you for joining us, and you too, Greg, too. You're a gentleman too. Just quickly, as before we get into it, I'd like to get just a brief overview on your thoughts on the EU at the moment. Greg, perhaps you would like to lead the charge for us.
So you want to begin with a gentle introduction, politically correct.
Don't be gentle. Come forward. Be yourself.
Well, the EU, in its current state, is an abomination and an affront to anything which is anything to do with democracy, decency, etc. I mean, this is why it's getting this this nickname. I mean, you're right in calling it a parasite, although it's getting this nickname which is taking more and more root, EU SSR, and this really triggers liberals, and I managed to deeply offend some UN representative in Serbia when I used that. She got deeply offended. It warmed my heart. So, I mean, this is showing what it is. It's all about this untamed, rampant bureaucracy that lacks any transparency and accountability. And furthermore, I mean, the EU as an ideological project, it's about expanding this very dystopian ideological notion and their understanding of liberalism, and we put it in this, at the expense of democracy. So, I mean, it's a lesson Orwell would be quite amazed at. I mean, they're talking about transparency and accountability of everyone else except them. And I mean, you see the clown show at the top. I mean, von der Leyen and that equally, shall we say, intellectually challenged one, Kaya Kallas, who, yeah, I mean, they're in an alternative universe. And this is why they're desperate. And this is why you're getting the clash now between the EU, which is trying to use different, what would we call it, crisis situations, whether it be COVID or whether it be Ukraine war, to collect and centralize and federalize power at the expense of the EU member states, which is why you're getting the counteraction from the likes of Orban, but also Fico, but now you've got Czechia joining it. And I think you can see the division in Poland between the globalists and the nationalists.
Oliver, what do you think?
Well, I'm just struck by the hypocrisy of the whole thing, really. The two most powerful European countries, in Germany and in France, the political parties that are the most popular are consistently blocked from exercising real power. I'm talking about the National Rally, for example, and I'm talking about the AfD in Germany. And this concept of a democracy shield, I think what's kind of interesting about it, from my point of view, is that it is an especially outrageous, blatant, and rather silly weaponization of a concept. A concept, that is to say, of democracy that has never, sacred though many of us, including myself, might feel whenever we hear it and often when we use it, but we know that the concept itself is riddled with all kinds of flaws and problems that were very aptly described and dissected over 100 years ago, or approximately 100 years ago, by Walter Lippmann. And I'm afraid Lippmann basically got it right. If we're going to pretend that democracy can only be manifested in the form of the possibility of voting between two parties, or the possibility of voting for between a somewhat greater number of parties. If that's how we want to define democracy, well, it is rubbish, and every thinking person knows it's rubbish. Every thinking person, like Walter Lippmann, understands that it's about social control. It's just about providing a mechanism to bring about what is hoped to be the relatively safe transition from one political regime to another, and that the populace is given the illusion of participation and of being represented by being able to vote between these parties, whereas the real power, of course, lies in the permanent state, the permanent status of the civil servants, if you will, or if you prefer, the deep state. Although I'm afraid Walter Lippmann didn't go far enough, because in his day, perhaps the mechanisms of dark money were not nearly as visible, or at least not nearly as well understood in their consequences as they are today. So one question I want to have, I'd like to just put on the table right now: what is democracy good for? Because I don't think we don't have it anyway in Europe. And I'm not quite sure it's terribly good for anything, really. It doesn't resolve the problems of inequality. It doesn't give us good leadership. It often creates very bad decisions. It often contributes to the division, or the breaking up of society, as often as it does contributing to the unification of society.
And Paul, and we'll get into that in a second, because I like to ask everybody what is democracy good for. But first of all, Paul, your views or your overview on Ursula and her democracy shield, which, by the way, it doesn't make any sense. If you have a shield, isn't that totally against democracy in the first place?
the whole thing I find to be very well. First off, as an American, we definitely have this idea of free speech, which is not necessarily um, it's not necessarily like as important in Europe. I feel like 1984 was written in the UK about UK, not about America, right? We've never really had so many concerns about free speech as much. We've oftentimes been much more concerned about the power of corporations because they have so much power in the United States. But now that I'm over here in Europe, because I live in Spain now, I'm much more aware of how things operate in Europe, and I just find the whole thing very disturbing. And it's not, and partly what I find disturbing about what's happening in Europe is the way it's trickling back into the United States. And let me just read to you, for instance, here's a story that just appeared in the New York Times yesterday. And the title is France Steps Up Fight Against Disinformation as U.S. Pulls Back, officials say. So the way the story is framed, it's not so much that like France steps up censorship, which is what they're really doing, but they stop this fight against disinformation. And it's not that the U.S. is protecting free speech; it's that the U.S. is pulling back from fighting disinformation. So the whole way that we discuss these things have been flip flopped, in which attacking disinformation is the thing we're supposed to do, not protecting free speech. And here's what I thought was also very odd. And this is the second paragraph of the story, and it says some Americans, conservatives, believe the Biden administration tried to undermine or even silence Republican voices by falsely labeling conservative arguments as being pushed by Russia or another foreign power. Look, no conservative believes that. That happened. This is exactly what happened. I mean, the Biden administration censored Americans. Now, what's somewhat false about that statement is they didn't censor just conservatives. They censored also people on the left in America, right? Because the people who are in charge, who are determining what is true and what is not true, are the power groups that reside within the center left elites. And if you step outside those little boundaries, if you go to the right or too much to the left, those people get silenced. So my concern about what's happening in Europe is not so much what's happening, in like my country where I live right now, Spain and other countries in Europe. It's the way this is trying to wash back onto America, in which they try to position America as not the outlier that's protecting free speech, but the outlier that's not standing up to disinformation and Russia. That's what's so insane about this entire discussion, I think.
Paul, I just got to ask you because you're the solitary American here, but don't feel alone. We still like you. Uh, I just want to know, Pam Bondi the other day, about 3 weeks ago, said that she wants to stamp out hate speech. Uh,
Right.
I mean, there you have already. They're talking about censorship.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, this is the problem that we're having also in America, right?
Mm.
So I just want to talk about this, very specifically, because the way it's being framed in America now is that Pam Bondi, what she's doing, what Trump's doing, is the same as what Biden's doing, which is totally false. I mean, the Biden administration and liberals in America had an entire machinery set up to censor random people, right? So that people you would find your Facebook, account shut down in the middle of nowhere if you're just some random mom with 2,000 people and you ask questions about the lockdowns, or you ask questions during COVID about the vaccines, right? And it was done secretly and behind the scenes, and no one knew it was happening. And it was totally terrible. And there's still denial this was going on. What Trump is doing, he is, and I don't like this, and I don't think it's good, but he's targeting very specifically, right, a very small set of people. And who these people tend to be are it's university people who are upset with what's happening in Israel, and they're going after the Israeli genocide in Palestine. Now, the difference with what Trump's doing is look, there's not a whole lot of, college protesters out there, right? This is a very small select group of people, and Trump's doing it right out in the public. You know exactly what he's doing. Nothing's being hidden. No one's accounts are being secretly shut down. He's doing it right out in the public, and if you disagree with it, which I do, you know what's going on. You know what you're disagreeing with. This is very different from what happened with Biden, where everything was secret and behind the scenes. So it's a very different issue.
Mm. Now, by the way, gentlemen, you can pop in. You can whenever you want to have your say or disagree with something. Don't feel bashful in coming forward. Um, Oliver made had asked a very good question. What is democracy good for? And Oliver, we'll start with you. What is democracy good for?
It's as I said before, it's a good tool of social control. The heart of the concept of democracy is that the idea behind democracy that gives it its juice, its life, is the idea that ordinary people, their voices are represented somehow in the halls of decision-making power, and maybe even that ordinary people can sort of participate in some meaningful way. That's the essence, it seems to me, of the concept of democracy, and that meaning of democracy, I hold as sacred. I wish that we had it, but we don't. What we have are a lot of states that call themselves democracy. Not that this is anything new. I mean, this has been going on for the past 100 or more years. They call themselves democracy, but they just they feed us an illusion, the illusion that you and I can make a difference, that you and I can actually substantially bring about a particular decision on something of public importance. Whereas the reality, of course, is that we have almost zero impact, even if we do vote, and that the powers that are more likely, far more likely, to influence the outcome of decision making are the centers of power which are allied with the centers of money, and they even go beyond the political process, because that is another essential existential problem with the very concept of democracy. It assumes that the political system is autonomous. It's not. The political system is the creature of big money, and big money has the media, and the media take our minds and shape our minds and give us the illusion of representation, being represented, and of participating.
Not me. Not me.
Greg, what is democracy good for?
That sounds like that Vietnam era song, right? What is it good for? War, yeah. But democracy, yeah. What is it good? It's one of the most used and abused words and concepts in the English dictionary. It has been used as political toilet paper for years. And it's quite interesting. In the 1990s, there was this slang word which was developed in Russia as a result of the excesses of the so-called promises of democracy to pacify them into being good citizens. And they came up with this word, "Demokratia." And so this is the word democracy put together with, I will be polite on your program, Mike, feces. So it's feces and democracy put together. So, I mean, that about shows what it is. And you can see the garbage. I mean, nowadays, I mean, they're shaking the hands of this Al Qaeda founder and number two of al Baghdadi of ISIS in Syria, and in his lovely suit. I mean, is this democracy that you have Al Qaeda running the show in a multi ethnic, multi confessional state as Syria and butchering people left, right, and centre? Well, as Oliver said, I mean, the hypocrisy and the double standards, I mean, maybe they'd go for that. And it's like these clowns in the EU, I mean, the EC, talking about democracy, but everything they do works against it. I mean, it's like they've got pages about speaking with one voice. And is that democracy? I mean, that sounds like something, from Star Wars, Star Trek, the Borg speak with one voice. And it's about as senseless as that. So, no, I mean, they got the slogans: democracy, rule of law, and respect for human rights. They violate all three regularly. And this idea of democracy is the pretense of voting, participatory democracy, because you're allowed to vote for some political parties that have been allowed to contest the election in an uneven system that is rigged against those who go against the system order. I mean, I mean, Oliver mentioned um, Walter Lippmann, and of course he was one of the cynics who was talking about this before he saw the light of the facade. But his colleague Edward Bernays went even further when he talked about democracy and public opinion. His basic premise was that the public were too stupid. They lacked the requisite intelligence to make the right decisions. So public opinion needed to be manipulated so they make the right decisions. And I think this is where we're at. I mean, you mentioned AfD in Germany, who are getting called an extremist organization, or funded by Russians, the usual garbage, anything they don't like to hear, they try to uh, character assassinate it. But it's funny how they do it. They say, well, West Germany, the people know propaganda and manipulation because they grew up in a free society, as opposed to those in East Germany, but fail the basic cognitive test. If you've been subjected to manipulation, you understand what manipulation looks and sounds like, which is why they're voting for AfD in those eastern parts of Germany, because they know they're getting conned by the system and these parasites like Merz and all of this other clown show. So this is my usual very optimistic outlook on these matters.
I agree with you. It's not just a train coming towards us; it's two trains in that tunnel. So, but I'd just like to know from Paul to tell us more about von der Leyen's Democracy Shield. And before we get into that, I'll show you my background, and there over my left shoulder is her. And what we would normally do is if I was looking for someone really evil, I'd like Starmer and stuff. You play with their eyes a bit and you make them look like the devil, which Starmer doesn't have to try too hard to look like that. But with von der Leyen, what I kept getting was this nothing. She was like there was this empty vessel. So when she pushes for the Democracy Shield, Paul, um, which space in the universe is that coming from? Because in between her ears, and I think you mentioned she's not a terribly bright person.
I mean, the particulars of that actually, the guy you first spoke about, Thomas Fotzi, really, and I don't have the article in front of me, but the way he pulled out specific sections of this law and how crazy it comes across, like when you look at like I don't have it in front of me, but like the particulars are actually what's I think the most interesting about this, because it's so Orwellian, and I don't have that in front of me, so I can't spit it back at you. But I think I think for me, what I find so odd is that why do they keep trying to push this stuff forward when it's become very clear that there's a growing majority of people who don't like these types of speech controls? They just don't like it. Like it's and there's pushback, and then they introduce something different again. I mean, so the same thing keeps happening. They seem incapable of trying to just leave this stuff alone. They want to keep coming back with something new. And when they introduce this stuff, it's like it's the same thing, right? It's like Russia. There's always this boogeyman in the right. It's like I thought it was really funny seeing what's happening here in Europe, because that's what's been happening in America. We've had this Russian boogeyman, for the since I think 2016, right? When Trump came in, it was always Trump and Putin in a room, and they're manipulating the American public. And now you see this happening in Europe. Like they just borrowed this stuff from America, which and I thought it was just hilarious. Like, when do they stop doing this? Like, I don't know who these people are who wake up every morning terrified and frightened of Russia, because I don't know anyone who like feels that way in America. I live in Spain. I don't know anyone who feels that way here in Spain. Like it's not what average people are talking about. Russia, 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 Russia. We don't necessarily like Putin, but like it's not what's driving the discussion every day. But it seems to be driving the discussion with everyone who wants to try and censor people behind this, concept of we're addressing disinformation. So I think that's the really odd thing. It's like, just stop. Like Russia is not the problem. Like we have real problems, and it's not our real problems are not Putin.
Yeah, and the problem really is, as you mentioned, it's not Beijing or not Russia. In reality, it's Brussels. How do we combat that, Oliver? How do we stop this? And it's not a creep. It's sort of like this.
Yeah.
It's like a Jello. You drop a Jello on the floor and it sort of just. Is that a good description of how it moves?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the way to combat it is just to
Vacuum.
really to let politics work like liquid flows downhill. In France and in Germany, we keep hearing, or at least we keep hearing from Macron, and we keep hearing from Merz and all of their chums about how extremist these and right wing these parties are, AfD and National Rally. And I don't pretend that I too am sometimes somewhat alarmed by some of what I do consider to be very racist and very disturbing comments that I hear from supporters of these parties. But, the real extremist parties in Europe are the parties at the center. That's where extremism is right now in Europe. And if I can pick up on this issue of immigration, because I think just like we see the term democracy being weaponized, the term ideas of immigration and racism are also being weaponized to support the extremist parties in the center in Europe. How do they do this? Well, first of all, they create massive waves of immigration through their support for policies of war, color revolution, and destabilization throughout the Middle East and in other parts of the world that push millions of people in search of safety in places they believe they're going to find safety in Europe. This, in turn, is massively destabilizing for the ordinary people of these countries who have to cope with these waves of desperate searches of safety from the countries that the West has been destabilizing and destroying for the past 10, 20 or more years. AfD and National Rally represent the working classes in this particular respect, not on the economic plane, but on these issues of racism. It is the working classes who are paying the price of imperialism. And they were never consulted, obviously, and they have reason to be upset with how their elites have maneuvered them into this ever weakening, disadvantageous labor situation as a result and now it's further weaponized. Therefore, the very problem that the elites created now becomes the reason why we have to vote for them and not for the parties that are representing those who are being intimidated and are suffering as a result of these problems of mass migration. And if I have time, because I want to pick up very quickly on the point that Greg was saying about Syria and democracy. I mean, if you compared modern Syria with, that is to say, Jalani Syria, al-Sharaa Syria, with the Syria of the Assad dynasty, there is no comparison. Syria, we might not think it's the most perfect political system in the world, but they had a democracy, for God's sake. It was quite a sophisticated arrangement whereby all of the faith groups and all of the minority groups in Syria had representation in the political process. It wasn't so bad, actually. And it was one of the best, most secular, least religiously driven countries in the Middle East. It was to a reasonable extent, I don't want to exaggerate too much, but it was a working, secular, socialist republic where women, for example, didn't have to wear the veil, women could go to work, women could get educated. We were talking about something way more sophisticated in Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan and all the other little pathetic little US puppets that we see in the Middle East.
Greg, how will the Digital Services Act in the EU? How will they control it? Are they going to go after people like you, me, Oliver, Paul, or are they just going to protect people from? I mean, they talk about misinformation, and it's really awful because if they adhere to what they're saying, we will never hear from the government again.
No, I mean it's a means to make you and I accountable and transparent for everything we say, especially if it contradicts the mainstream narrative. So I mean, they might try and get me, but welcome, come to Bangladesh and try and get me here. I'll give them a challenge or two about
Well,
such things.
just mention about your one of the former prime ministers. I think she is not in a good place at the moment, and perhaps
No.
visiting politicians might experience such an exit from living.
Yeah, well, I mean, but these are what they sound so innocent, so to speak. And this is the Orwellian part of it. We're doing it in the name of your good to protect you, children, from, speaking too much, knowing too much. I mean, it's. I mean, this is going along the lines of how the EU and we'll add SSR started sanctioning its own people without due legal process. I mean, those two German journalists that ended up, exiling in Russia because it was safer for them there. And then you had another German citizen of Middle Eastern origin who spoke something about Gaza, which wasn't politically correct, and he's been sanctioned. So, what has he been charged with in a court of law? Where is his conviction? This is what the Digital Security Act is all about. It's a Orwellian authoritarian mechanism that can be wielded at will against any political target they seek to use it against. And who are the ones who are doing it? I mean, you get these idiots, Cullis and von der Leyen and so forth, and especially when you get these ones. I mean, that von der Leyen has got herself in hot water, not because she's an idiot, but because of her excesses with the coronavirus vaccine deals with a lot of dodgy stuff. While the EU is talking about transparency and accountability, good governance, and everything like this, and are making sure as hell that they avoid all of these things. So this is what it's about. I mean, it's like the UK, everyone's favourite banana monarchy, which I mean, if you post the wrong meme, you go to jail. You have a silent prayer on the street near a particular building, you go to jail. You say King Charles is not my king. You're one of 50 people with those pre-crime detentions, just like that Minority Report. Put them in jail before something bad happens.
They should be careful because they ship people for stealing potatoes, and they'll be shipped to Australia. So they're all going to insult people.
You'll get a whole new lot of citizens there shortly then, Mike.
Thanks. Oh, well, they are. They're coming over for the Ashes, which is going to be interesting. They'll have a very miserable time if they're coming from the UK. Paul, just before we get into, I just want to ask you a question. The shutdown of free speech or control of the internet, it's lockstep with all other countries. I mean, you can see the UK, see throughout the EU, look at the Australia, New Zealand. Just out today in Australia, one of our state premiers from New South Wales, Chris Minns, says that while Australia has free speech, which it really hasn't anymore, once it moves towards hate speech, which is again subjective to the person designating that's hate speech, then the public should expect government intervention. What they're trying to say is, or what they are saying and succeeding, is that they're going to put their beak into your business and become the moral adjudicators. Why? I mean, because you're a very good investigative journalist, and we always hear, 2030 and WEF and ogres hiding under rocks and stuff. What's the sole reason? What's the main reason to control? And by the way, our opposition here, who are for free speech, said the government must control the internet. And the whole world is going. I mean, unless they're all related to von der Leyen, who knows? But why do you think this is happening? Why do you think this great shutdown of free speech? Is it because of people like you, me, Oliver, Greg, or is it that they just like if you stop all the dissension, you can really get look at COVID. They got people to put in a poison in their arms without thinking about it.
Well, first off, I want to say that, what is hate speech? Hate speech is usually now seems to be hate speech is speech that governments hate. Like that's what it is, right? So this stuff started, in the United States at least, started sort of percolating up in around 2016, I would say, where you started to see control, cancel culture, these sorts of things starting to percolate up in the United States. And today, I can't tell you much about Australia. That's one I don't know. I get these very disturbing reports that come out of Australia, and I have a couple of Aussie friends, and I'm like, did that really happen? Like, is that really going on in your country? It's to me,
Really happened. It really happened, and still is.
Well, the one that really struck me during COVID, just not to diverge too much, was you had one of your provincial governors or whatever who was locking people up during COVID. They had these like COVID camps. And when this first came up, I didn't believe that this was true. I'm like, no, this is some craziness coming out of Australia. They're not really locking people up. It was some guy in like a Northern Territory or something like that. It was this insanity that was going on. But what's really going on is, you're right, this is really happening globally. I'll give you one example, right? I think this is a group that I think you can use and tie across the different parts of the world, right? There's a group called the Center for Countering Digital Hate. The London Telegraph just reported that the Trump administration wants to deport the guy who runs it. His name's Imran Ahmed. He's a British political operative who helped to put Keir Starmer in power. He worked in concert with a guy named Morgan McSweeney, who's now chief of staff to Keir Starmer. Morgan McSweeney is probably the most powerful politico in the United Kingdom right now. I mean, he pushed out Jeremy Corbyn and put Keir Starmer, into the prime minister's seat, right? Imran Ahmed, they started Center for Countering Digital Hate in 2018. He now lives in D.C. I know exactly where he lives because I have a whistleblower who's given me a bunch of internal documents that I reported on. For instance, right before the election, Matt Taibbi and I rolled out a piece where they were trying to kill Musk's Twitter, right? That's what CCDH's entire program was trying to do, right? Imran Ahmed lives in the United States. He went back to the UK, was the first person to testify in favor of a law called the Online Safety Act that came about in the UK. It was first introduced by a guy, a member of parliament, who's on the board of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, right? Imran Ahmed, they also have a staffer in Brussels, and they worked very carefully to help, bring about these new law changes in Brussels, right? He's flown to Australia to testify in Australia. So you have these people, they're all working together, right? There's like a network of them that are working together to try to put these laws all over the world, because as soon as you have one country, right, that allows for internet freedom, people can pop up. They can appear on a TV program or whatever that country might be. So they have to have a global censorship campaign, a global censorship, so that everyone's on the same page. And so this is what's going on is this, and again, who is Imran Ahmed? What are his politics? His politics are center left. He ran out Jeremy Corbyn, who was the left guy, right, inside Labour, and brought in the conservative or center left Keir Starmer in Labour, right? That's who they want in power, right? They want the center left in power. And this is how it's working across the globe. This is why Biden was doing this, right? He's a center-left candidate in the United States. I'm sure if we look to see, I'm sure that I don't know what von Layden's politics are. I'm sure he's center-left elitist too. That's how this stuff is operating across the globe. It's about making sure that there's a center-left voice that's in charge across the planet.
I just want to. We have a. I want to compare the alternate media to legacy media, and I want to look at because at the end, I could probably say I'll probably get shot for this, but I think the alternate media is probably a lot more treacherous than legacy media. At least you know where you stand with legacy.
Exactly.
And I think there's we have discovered there is a particular gentleman who controls hundreds of people, small programs, podcasters, and stuff around the EU and in other parts of the world, but mainly in Europe and the UK, and it's quite disturbing. But what is equally disturbing is that the EU want to a golden age for Europe. For Europe biased media, for those that are going to support the narrative, they're handing out a stack of money, incentives to encourage these people to talk about the truth, but it has to be the narrative from the government. Oliver, I don't know if you know a whole lot about alt media or the other side. There's not much difference anymore because there's some very large numbers. And some of them are quite. The numbers they're not right, but they do get paid a lot of money. If you look at Israel, they were paying out $7,000 a post on X, and if you look at Qatar, they're doing the same thing. So if they're doing that, and with the information that I have, which I'm not going to release just yet, that these people are controlled. Where do we stand with the truth? Not my truth or your truth, the plain good, how we're brought up as to tell the truth. And if it makes you uncomfortable or you're in trouble or whatever, so what? It is the truth. Now we have von der Leyen and the EU going to pay even more independent media or small operators a stack of money to switch their narrative. And they take it. They're taking it. So where does it put, say, you and I, the general public, and if they're trying to push a narrative, and you even have the nudging from these independent operators, at the end of the day, it's a pretty strong weapon, isn't it? And makes our life quite difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the golden rule is that wherever the eyeballs are gazing, that's where the intelligence agencies look, and that's where all the lobbyists and all the other guys are looking. So as soon as an independent, a truly independent voice emerges, and it begins to attract popularity, it begins to attract attention, then you can be absolutely sure the big money corrupt it, and to turn it to the advantage of the elites. It used to be such an easy game to play back in the good old days when the mainstream media were almost entirely under the control of government and the deep state. But then along came the internet. The internet was kind of maturing more around the time of the U.S. invasion of Iraq back in 2003 and all the nonsense about weapons of mass destruction. And around that time, the global population was for the first time being exposed to all the stuff that ends up on the cutting floor in the world's press, in the world's broadcast media. For the first time, we were beginning to see what we had not been shown up until that time. And for a little while, just for a moment, in historical time, we were joyous in the ebullient and this extraordinary diversity of information that truly challenged the mechanisms of power. So, of course, the system can't live with that. And ever since then, we've seen more and more deliberate, almost overt, authoritarian, dictatorial attempts to bring this beast back into the cage, lock it up, throw a cover over it, and back we go to the muffled voice of what we're told is the truth. And the essential truth right now, of course, is being told by Chancellor Merz in Germany. He wants us to understand that Germany is going to go to Europe, going to go to war with Russia in 2029, and it is so very kind of him to let us know when this Third World War is going to break out. That Merz is borrowing $1 trillion to enable. Although Germany doesn't actually have any money at the moment, it's been busily deindustrializing since I think the US essentially, I still claim the US deserves greatest responsibility, culpability for the destruction of Nord Stream. Why? Well, because Biden told us he was going to do it a few weeks before the Russians invaded. German Chancellor Scholz was standing right next to him, kind of nodding his head sort of enthusiastically to know that Germany's essential source of cheap energy was going to be destroyed by the United States. This is just extraordinary. And it's extraordinarily worrying because Russia now, there's absolutely no evidence that Russia at any point had any intention other than to protect the peoples, the Russian-speaking peoples of the Donbass from what was going to be almost certainly was going to be their destruction by the Western-supported Ukrainian army. And of course, Russia was also just as concerned about U.S. refusal to talk about taking down its intermediate nuclear missiles that were pointed at Moscow from Romania and from Poland. But now, because of these these absurd theatrical performances, or are they? From people like Merz, who is essentially working on behalf of the finance industry and the military-industrial complex. That's who he's earning money for, and Russia now has to seriously consider: is Europe really going to try to go to war with us? If they're not asking themselves that question, then there's something incredibly, unusually incompetent, and I don't think that is the case with Russian intelligence. They have to be planning for war now. They have to be planning for what happens. First of all, they have to plan to take over the entirety of Ukraine, because if they only take the east, that's not enough. The West is going to pour everything it has to into Western Ukraine to be sure that Russia has to continue to spend money on trying to protect its frontier there. So Russia will go west, and now it has to ask itself: so what's next? What is next? Do we hit Poland? Do we hit Romania? Do we just bomb Berlin? Do we bomb Brussels? Do we send an Oreshnik onto Washington to shut those guys up once and for all? Do we bomb the general? Do we send a Poseidon tornado? I'm sorry, Poseidon missile onto the Gerald Ford as it lies off the coast of Venice. Russia has to wake up. Russia has to defend itself now because its enemies are saying, "We're coming for you." And what the only sensible thing to do when your enemy says, "We're going to come for you," you don't just sit around the table and think, "Oh, they really mean what they say." No, you plan, of course. And now they are planning. And the United States and the West is at one of its weakest points in history. It's denuded of serious weaponry. Russia is infinitely ahead of the West in terms of its nuclear capability. It has to act. If it's going to act at all, if it's seriously interested in preserving Russia and the Russian people, it has to act sooner rather than later. And China needs to be thinking in the same way. And if they're not, well, God help us all. God bless Donald Trump.
Or Ursula von der Leyen helping you. So I just got to make a couple of mentions here. You're talking about Merz preempting, saying to Russia that we're going to let you know that we are going to attack you in 2029. A bit like one of your, I think it was Milley, from your Defense Department in the US, when he said, if we ever do a surprise attack on China, we will let them know. Let them know. And I thought, man, we have very polite. I'm trying not to get into hysterics here because I thought that was one of the funniest things I've ever heard. But that was just incredible. And you have to understand, Australia, they're supporting Ukraine. Freedom. As they drag away someone to fight on the front line, you'll die on the front line or you'll die in the backyard. Which you want? I'll go to the front line. But I'm just thinking though, we gave I think Ukraine, I think about 100 their armored personnel carriers called Bushmaster, and just to and when I tell you what the ability of a Bushmaster is, then you'll understand that maybe we really aren't supporting Ukraine. A Bushmaster, well, a Pinto. Remember that Pinto, that magnificent machine that didn't work in the car from Ford? Well, it's very much like a Pinto. And the Pinto was actually much more dangerous than the Bushmaster. And there were many, many complaints because the Bushmaster we sent for the Ukrainian army to use against the Russians kept breaking down. So, Greg, I just want to go back to you. Let's talk about the COVID corruption allegations against von der Leyen. As you know, a country or a nation or a bunch of nations backed up with NATO's, and they've got this such, they adhere to law. They don't like bad people, and I'm doing this tongue in cheek. She was up to her neck. She was up to her neck, and it was common knowledge. We all thought that she was going to spend some time behind, beautiful Romanian jail or something, and it just went nowhere. Do you have any information on that or thoughts on that?
Well, of course, the EU is very adverse to transparency because that brings about accountability. And those ones at the top, the last thing they want is transparency and accountability. And whenever something starts to emerge like this, then you have a distraction. And the distraction can take many forms. For example, it can be a funny little spat somewhere. I mean, like you had this funny little reality show where apparently it looked like von der Leyen was giving Cullis a telling off. These things are theatre. Or else the theatre can be some tough talk with Russia or China. I mean, it's like when you had the Three Stooges from the EU go off to lecture Xi in his own house about how he should behave, and they slap, and back to your EU SSR. And, you don't get that kind of garbage here. So, I mean, the rest of the world understands these clowns. I mean, I came back yesterday from Romania, and it's quite interesting to see the things here. I was at a couple of conferences which were quite stacked with neocons, including Ian Brzezinski, who was sitting next to me, son of the late Brzezinski. And I told so my wife asked me, so what kinds of chaos and calamity occurred at the conference? And I said, well, actually, they kind of agreed with what I was saying, even though what they were saying and what I was saying were completely different things. It depends on what you can afford to say and what you cannot afford to say. And so she laughed at me and said, you're going mainstream. And I told a good Romanian friend this, and he goes, no, Greg, you don't need to worry. You're not going mainstream. Everyone else is starting to move more towards you. And what your thoughts are, you're not moving anywhere. So yeah, it's a funny world because I mean, yeah, people still can't afford to say things the truth. I mean, it's this emperor has no clothes, but you can't say they have no clothes. And then you get someone like me. Well, that one's got no clothes and looks as ugly as hell. So, but they don't disagree. I mean, say a year or 2 years ago, they would have said, "You can't say that." And I was like, yes, I can. But now there is none of this. So people understand there is something fundamentally wrong. It's got to that stage, but it's still yet to come when people other than us can say, well, this thing is absolutely snafu.
Um,
And so, I mean, that's to come. And I think eventually it will come, but yeah, I don't see any coming back of the EU. And I mean, this thing about trying to buy prostitutes with extra money, I mean, this is a sign of desperation. This is not a sign of strength. And what it implies, they try to get, what would you call it? They try to get effect with activity. So they do a bunch of things and they expect an effect. But if you look what Israel has done, buying all of those different influences, what is the effect? You've got the activity, but there is no effect because people see through this. And I think more and more people are seeing through it and not particularly happy and consoled by what they see.
Paul, as an investigative journalist, were you surprised that von der Leyen, it just went away? All of her COVID corruption allegations, they just went away.
So I actually just looked it up because I knew that the New York Times had sued to get access to the text messages about what you're talking about is the COVID contracts that where I mean it's like what happened here in Spain for me, for instance, is we got the Pfizer vaccine, but what happened is the EU bought massive amounts of doses and then parlayed that out to different states, and what we got here in Spain was Pfizer. That's the COVID vaccine that I got. And the issue became like, well, how were these contracts done? They were totally behind the scenes. No one knew, how it was negotiated, how much money the companies got. And when they tried to get it, they couldn't get it. So I was just looking this up, and it took years. And the New York Times actually sued to get the communications, and what they got were heavily redacted. And so you couldn't really tell what happened. We know that something terrible happened. We know that like somehow a shit ton of money went, directed at these major corporations that pay for these vaccines. And then people tried to figure out like what happened. It was all hidden behind the scenes. But I don't know. To me, I'm not shocked because let me just give you an example of what I think about the way the EU operates. Because I like the idea of the way the EU works. That hey, all the different states can come together and they can then have power in numbers and everything. That's the concept. The way it works, although, on the other hand, is quite odd. And the reason I know this is because I've been inside the EU and I've spoken to staffers who staff members of parliament there. I worked for several years in the United States Senate, so I have a very good understanding of how our government functions in the United States. If you ask me like how do I get a law passed, how do I get something done in the United States, I could guide you and tell you who you'd want to go meet with, how the law is being created, then at the back end, how the regulations are formed, all those things. I understand all those concepts, okay? I went to the EU and I was there because they were having a parliamentary meeting. It was Kennedy was there actually, who's now the secretary of HHS, talking about these internal documents that had come up in a lawsuit in the United States about Monsanto and how this pesticide glyphosate was actually dangerous. And what the EU was doing, they were having a meeting because they had just approved glyphosate again for several years, saying that it was safe. And then they're reading these documents in the United States that Monsanto knew that glyphosate was dangerous and was hiding it. So like, how do we pass this, approval for glyphosate, this pesticide, when we're seeing all this stuff coming out of the United States, the thing is actually dangerous. So they had this meeting. They were looking at trying to reform their pesticide law in the United States. So, I went to the meeting and everything, and then afterwards, I went out and had some drinks with some of the parliamentary staffers. And I was asking them, so what? How does this work next? Like, what happens? Like, is there a hearing, and then everyone votes on this, and it's passed this? They couldn't tell me how it works next. These were staffers working for members of parliament in the EU in Brussels, and they had no clue how the process actually works. These were professionals. These were people in their 40s, like professional people who have, years of experience in the EU. And I was just shocked because I could tell them, like, I can tell you how it would work in the United States, with our government. I think the way the government operates, it's so complicated and so opaque. But I mean, look, it's not that I don't know how it functions. The people who work there don't know how it functions. It's just really odd. It was really shocking to me to find that out. By the way, I was stunned.
But, and to think that they control many, 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 many people, and in many ways the future of the planet. Because if they decide to collect all their dollars and do a jaunt towards Russia, there's going to be it's not going to last very long, regardless whether it's just conventional or nuke. If it's nuke, no one lasts very long, and if it's conventional, the EU. I mean, I can imagine some of the military. I won't say what I was going to say, but I'm sure they'll be fighting many, many, many thousands of kilometres away. Oops, I might get shot. Oliver, and to all of our guests here, where do you see? Because this is our final question, otherwise we'll go way over. Where do you see the EU, if you're looking, say, forward? I need you to look into your glass bowl or your cup of green tea or whatever, and look forward to, say, 12 months with the with the excitement about the Democracy Shield, the Digital Services Act, the media landscape being cajoled into following the narrative and so forth. Oliver, where will the EU be in a year's time?
It'll probably still be there, Paul. This may simply be wishful thinking, but picking up on what Paul was just saying, with respect to the opaqueness of the European Commission and the European project more generally, I wonder to what extent the spillover from the crisis of corruption in Ukraine will begin to penetrate some of the hidden recesses of European decision making that, at the moment, are very mysterious to very many of us. It's very difficult, I think, to truly to understand the idiocy of European leadership. Often people say, well, these guys have just invested so much of their political capital and so on, this, that, and the other. They don't dare change position now. And besides, the media have done such a wonderful job of totally idiofying the European population with respect to Russia that really the politicians don't have that much a challenge. But I think it's probably deeper than that. And I don't know whether, Paul, you intended to point in that direction. But when you think of someone like Merz and the background to Merz, surely you also have to think, I mean, right now we're talking about 100 million. 100 million is nothing. It's peanuts. It's absolutely nothing. It's got to be billions. I think, of wealth that is being sucked out of the Ukraine casino by the Banderites and their European and US enablers. And I think that some scandal of that kind, if exposed, I think could begin to force not necessarily the dissolution of the European Union, although I have much less good feeling about the EU than you do, Paul. But I don't think it's going to dissolve anytime soon. I wish that it would, but it sure as hell needs to become, let's go back to our original concept, democratic, that is to say, representing the real interests of real people across the European continent. Because right now it's a continent that's just slipping into economic catastrophe and quite possibly nuclear annihilation.
Greg, your thoughts? Where do we see the EU in 12 months? Do we still have what's that song from Steelers Wheel, Jerry Rafferty, jokers to the right, clowns to the left, or something like that? Same thing with the EU. Do we still have von der Leyen, as someone said, running around like a headless chicken and still collecting out with a plate to get some dollars to attack Russia?
Well, I think maybe someone should go and check von der Leyen's bathroom to see if she has a golden toilet.
I'm not sure of
Just like the incident in Ukraine at the moment, because when these things come, they just erode more. You have this shield which they keep on talking about. Who else talked about being a shield against Russia? It was the Nazis, the original ones. They talked about the European shield against Bolshevism. So they're recycling. They can't even be original in their ideological propaganda. Now, I think the biggest thing which will come in the next 12 months or so is the clash between the European Commission and its attempts to centralise and federalise power and some individual member states that will try to resist that and retain a measure of sovereignty so that they don't get completely used and abused by the clown show that is the European Commission.
Paul, what do you think? Do we see utter chaos, or do we see the same? That they're going to do this, do that, do this, do that, and really not much else happens except they're saying they're going to do this, do that, do this, do that. What do we see? What do you think will happen over the next 12 months? Because they are fairly excitable at this stage.
Well, I think they just, the EU, they just keep kind of shambling along. They're not necessarily very effectual. It's incredibly opaque. No one really knows what's guiding what. As far as this democracy shield, I think, what was it, like $100 million that they're putting into this? Why don't they do something real with that money? How about fixing up parks all across Europe? Urban parks or something like that. Do something that actually is good for people and not doing what this democracy shield seems to be all about, which is money from, the different countries going to the EU that is then used to protect the whole EU process. That's what's really going on here, right? They're not trying to protect you and me from disinformation. What they're trying to do is protect their own power. And I find that incredibly problematic that's what this is all about. And no one really cares whether, hey, I'm fine with having an EU, if it works. I'm fine with democracy if it works. Everyone, these concepts, these institutions that are created, what people want is what works, what makes their lives better. People don't come out and support democracy because they're not I support democracy, that's this great concept like a religion. They just see it as a process that works to make their lives better. And what people want are processes, whether it's, protection against disinformation, protection for free speech, democracy shield, no EU, yes an EU. They just want their lives to be better. And the way things are functioning right now, people don't see that this is making their lives better. And I think this is the concept. This is what really it all comes down to, is what makes your life better. And the way things are functioning right now with these sort of center-left elites working together across the globe, that's not working. And that's what we all know. And so we're discussing things about the way they're trying to maintain and control their power, and it's dissipating because we're all talking about how it's not working. And that's what we're here talking about today.
I totally agree. In Australia, we've got December 10 is when they need anybody, or everybody's got to log in and show some way that they are over 16, which is a problem for me because I don't look that old at all. And we have those issues. And then on this 27th of December is when you have to then show your ID, biometrics or whatever it is, before you can go to a search engine. they did a test, I'm sure, the other day with YouTube. Now, why would you ever want to block YouTube, by the way? Anyway, I had to log in. I thought, oh, what a bugger. So I logged in. It was just went to the phone and did your bits and pieces. But you can leave it there. And so it has that big yellow or big red thing on the screen. So if you have a family with children who are 16 and under, and they go to the TV and hit the YouTube thing, there's the thing which says, mum or dad. You click that and you log in. So I think they need to go back to the drawing board. It's just not go to work. And which is very disappointing because the Julie Inman Grant was the person that brought this through, and she's very happy to brag about her CIA days and her good friends who are still at the CIA. And if you want someone either to stuff it up or do a good job, not too sure on how to surveil your citizens, you probably go to the CIA. But maybe they won't talk to her and this thing falls flat on its face. Who knows? Gentlemen, I have enjoyed this very much. Paul D. Thacker, also Oliver Boyd Barrett and Greg Simons. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. A bit over the time, but I could listen to you guys all day. You're all much more intelligent than I am, and I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Have a great night. This is Protagonist.